Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a little bit of a box office debrief by looking at our boy, Scotty Boy Mendelsohn, the man of 1,000 terrible takes, but he actually has some pretty keen insight every once in a while, and including today talking about Eternals and what the likely end result for that film is going to be, and also what No Time to Die's end result will likely be, and some interesting points about it also being available on PVOD and still somehow making money overseas. Before diving into those numbers and what he has to say about the matter, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button, and smash the rumble button. It really does help out a lot. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So from Scotty Boy Mendelsohn, as it says, Eternals nears Dune as Venom passes Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yes, Venom passes Amazing Spider-Man 2, that amazing film that was just downright terrible. But hey, Venom is probably the most successful film this year when you actually take raw net gains of any given film. But let's go ahead and look into some of the insight that he has to say about Eternals, because he's got some hard truths for Disney, some hard truths for the current state of Marvel, and I think it's something worth talking about. It says, in holdover news for the weekend, Marvel's Eternals earned $10.8 million, 60% drop in its third weekend, taking a sharper drop after similar second weekend falls than the likes of Black Widow, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. Yes, Ghostbusters Afterlife opening to $44 million took some of the family audience from Eternals, but Marvel is supposed to be, quote, the danger, end quote. Yes, Scotty Boy, every now and then you have something out there you put and you're like, hey, wait a minute, let me go ahead and let me put this little, crumb out there, but you don't ever reach the full conclusion. You don't ever actually complete the thoughts, unless, of course, it's a political point, in which case you love to complete those thoughts. But when it comes to this one, you don't talk about what it is that's going on in the MCU. You don't talk about why is it that this film is not the danger? Why is it that the MCU is not in as strong of a state as it once was? But anyway, let's go on and see what he has to say here. It says, the latest MCU fantasy has now earned $135.8 million, legs like Thor the Dark World, which dropped 61% in weekend 3 against the $158 million launch of The Hunger Games Catching Fire in 2013, will put Eternals at $166 million by the end, or presumably just above No Time to Die and A Quiet Place Part 2. So this film is expected to make around $166 million domestically by the end of its run, which would put it as the weakest of all of the MCU films to come out this year, with films like Black Widow getting closer to $180 million and Shang-Chi being well over $200 million domestically. So all in all, a pretty terrible situation. The situation was looking a lot better internationally, however, based off of the fact that it's not holding nearly as strong as it was in its earlier release, definitely does not seem to be good news for this movie, as Scotty Boy points out. It says, the news is better overseas, if only by default. It earned another $33.5 million worldwide, including a 45% overseas hold, for a running cum of $200.3. Remember that this is now the highest grossing international release of any MCU film to come out during the pandemic times, and it says right there, $336.1 million is the worldwide total. The ambitious but poorly reviewed epic should still pass Black Widow's $380 million worldwide and still end up with around $415 million global, with a 40-60 domestic overseas split. Whether it reaches Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings' $430 million is a matter of how well it holds against Encanto over Thanksgiving weekend. It may not be a disaster, at least on a COVID curve, but it's no rousing victory. Fortunately, Shang-Chi is this year's top domestic grosser with $225 million and a genuine crowd-pleasing favorite. Okay, and there you see the typical Forbes, Scotty Boy coming in, right, saying, oh man, well, you know what? It's a genuine clowes-pleasing favorite. Yes, because when you actually talk to people who give it a positive score and you ask them, hey, where would Shang-Chi actually, end up on your list? Guess where it typically ends up? They give it a high rating. They give it one of the highest ratings they've ever given a film. And then they say, oh yeah, it's about middle of the pack, low middle of the pack. So it just, again, kind of is amazing to me how they're continuing to try and spin the film in this way. Now, again, to be fair and for full disclosure, I have yet to see the film. It is now available on Disney Plus for free. So because My wife has us still having Disney Plus. Obviously, that is something that I have access to, but do I really want to sit down and watch that film? I don't really know yet, but I might just to be able to see, okay, is it as bad as many of the people that I trust have said that it is, or is it kind of, again, this, what general audiences have said, this middle of the road, typical by the numbers MCU film that has a terrible ending. I don't really know exactly what to get out of what he is trying to say here, other than the fact that this is true that Shang-Chi is one of the best domestic releases of this year. However, Shang-Chi, even with it having $225 million domestically, remember, is only marginally successful when you actually look at the raw box office, comparing it to not just other films, but also to its budget and total costs. So remember, when we take a film like Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, we will have to, of course, take all of those things into account, because we cannot just look at certain numbers and then say, okay, we're just going to leave it here. So Shang-Chi, right? Remember that the film opened up $257 million by its second weekend. That range on the film then was $368 million to $515 million, with the average being around $441 million. The film at 430 is getting very close to that number, right? So it's right at that 60% number. And so this is a movie that's right now $33.3 million in the black. Some people dispute that number, saying it actually costs more, that it's not taking into account other factors. And again, all of those things could be true, but they're not verifiable. They're hard to really grasp on. And also there's 1,000 other considerations that could easily impact this end result. The point is to say is that, yes, this film broke even, and yes, this film made profits, but only marginally so. This is not a huge runaway success. For Disney this year, it is. It's probably one of the biggest successes that they've really had so far this year. But when you add that on top of the massive losses they've had from several other of their releases this year, you start to realize that things are not looking all that great. All the while Eternals, right, with $336 million, though I did project it to make around lose $58 million or make $37 million, so be basically as successful in total, as very similar to what we saw with Shang-Chi. It's not looking like that's going to be the case either, because as it goes on to say that it still expects the film, right? He expects the film to get somewhere around $415 million and maybe $430 million. So that is right now the range that he has total for this movie, which means that the film is going to drop off. It's going to be competing against other films over Thanksgiving. This makes, of course, a lot of sense, but it also means that this movie is going to fall somewhere in that losing money territory, right? So again, the minimum projection I had on this film, based on the numbers of the first 2 weeks, was $401 million. So what he's saying is that the film's going to make somewhere between $415 and $430 by the end of its run, which would still put it below the $500 million it needs to break even. There's some that have tried to say, well, if you read certain reports, they got $100 million in free advertising from X source. Here's the issue. Is that $100 million in extra marketing that I got for free, not including the typical marketing cost? Because remember, these films were delayed for a long time. So when I come up with that $300 million total cost with marketing, that's just typical marketing costs. And so if you're coming up with articles that say that the entire marketing budget was covered, that's one thing. If it's additional marketing coverage or anything like that, or if it's not considering any other additional marketing costs that they could have added on top of that, because we all know studios just love to spend money, then again, the point is rather moot. And so that $500 million is the most likely break-even number then for this film. So even Skyboy Mendelsohn is pointing out that this movie is not likely going to be able to reach the point of profitability because of that very fact. Now, he mentions the whole COVID curve stuff, but again, I pretty much write that off as being complete nonsense. What is interesting, though, and I think this is definitely something worth talking about, and it's a very good point that he makes, is about No Time to Die. And the reason why is because not only is it the most successful film to come out during the pandemic, but it's also doing some pretty amazing numbers overseas in the midst of it being available online as well. And that is something that, even though the film is not very good, is still worth mentioning. It says, No Time to Die has passed Fast 9 as the biggest Hollywood grosser since Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker with $1.073 billion in December of 2019. Again, pretty major feat. And its current $579 million overseas cum is larger than anything out of Hollywood since Frozen 2, which had $972 million overseas in November of 2019. The 25th official James Bond movie earned another $2.7 million in weekend 7, another solid hold, despite being concurrently available on PVOD. MGM, Eon, and Universal's $250 million actioner has earned $154.7 million domestically. Again, major flop there. And $734 million worldwide in total. At this rate, it should end up with around $161 million domestic and $775 million worldwide. And so Scotty Boy Mendelsohn is saying that this film is going to end somewhere around $775 million, which, according to those estimates, would put the film at the point of profitability, because the break-even point for this movie, at least, is $750. Now, again, we can argue, were there other marketing costs, etc., but as I always like to say, when you start to get into those discussions, you then have to talk about, okay, what about any cross-brand promotions? What about any tax breaks and tax incentives and all these other things? All these other factors that come into play. And so when you start to dive into the weeds there and get a lot more complicated, you start to realize that these numbers can be, again, basically could be a range of anywhere. Remember, if you made this point before, you could argue that the break-even number is like anywhere between $650 million to $900 million. I mean, if you really want to get into the weeds there. So just by going by typical marketing cost, typical budgeting, right, things like that, based on the reports. Again, he mentions $250 million budget. $300 million, though, has been reported by other sites. And so I'm going to go, again, with that higher number there just because it came from, to me, a much more reliable source than the others. And so $750 million is the likely break even. So the fact that it's going to get to $775 million if it stays on its current track, including the PVOD sales, which is going to, again, bring in some more money, and any 4K Blu-ray sales, I think it's pretty safe to say that this film is at the very least going to be a wash for them by the end of its run. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting that Scotty Boy Mendelsohn was almost there with Eternals, right? Calling it out, saying it's supposed to be the danger, and it's not. It's not. Eternals is, box office-wise, not doing very well. It's going to be a financial loss based on his numbers and his estimates. So again, not the biggest loss necessarily of MCU history, but definitely a financial loss. And in the history of Disney this year, which has seen a lot of financial losses and a lot of financial failures, it is not good for one of their usually guaranteed successful titles to be in that position. If you kind of just go back a little bit to the very beginning of the pandemic times and exactly how much film, how much money that they've been losing since the beginning of the pandemic, it really all starts back with trying to see if I can find the film on here, so that way I can do a full breakdown of it. So it was pretty much in this weekend, right? So Onward was a $220 million loss for Disney, right? Huge loss. Soul, they decided some reason to put that out for free on Disney Plus over Christmas time, $155 million loss. Raya and the Last Dragon, $78 million loss for Disney. Cruella, about a $15 million loss, though that is a lot better than what it was originally going to be. Let's see some of the other films to come out from Disney. And they obviously, you have the 20th Century Fox films in there, but I'm not really going to count those only because it's really difficult to really tell if that's a financial loss, seeing that the money was already put forward by 20th Century Fox before they were bought. So it gets a little complicated there. But Black Widow, $73 million loss. And obviously some people say, yeah, but that's not including the Disney Plus numbers. And it's like, yes, but you're then not including the lawsuit where they settled with Scarlett Johansson, which cuts into that. So Black Widow, right, would be a financial loss in that way as well. Jungle Cruise, massive loss. Even though it overperformed 45%, that means that it doubled the number of its early 2 weeks. Still, because of its massive budget, $175 million loss for Disney. Shang-Chi was really, again, as you can see, the most successful film that they have had as far as a pure Disney property, not including the Fox stuff. $33 million in net gain, net profit. Oh, it's not looking good, right? Now Eternals is at negative $98 million. It's expected to then end up somewhere around the negative $50 to negative $20 million. So as you can see, it's been a pretty bad year for Disney. And the fact that, again, he calls out saying you're supposed to be the danger, but does not complete the thought. Scotty Boy, you still remain Scotty Boy Mendelsohn. But anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Do you think Eternals is going to get to the heights of $415 million, getting close to the Black Widow numbers or closer to the Shang-Chi numbers? Again, it seems not to be holding as well as some had expected it to do overseas, myself included. So what do you think about that? Do you think that it's going to be able to break even? I doubt it at this point. If Scotty Boy Mendelson's saying that it's not likely, then it's not likely going to happen at that point because he's one of the biggest shills out there for Disney properties. And also, are you surprised that No Time to Die is going to end up around $775 million? That's pretty insane that movie is going to hike is going to take that much money and make that much money as far as just, again, total box office. Obviously, that's not going to be the biggest return on investment, but the fact that we're saying that Universal's, MGM's $300 million monster is going to be even just in the black after its initial release when things were just looking terrible, because domestically it did nothing. Domestically, it's not one of the it's just not even close to some of the bigger domestic releases this year. But that international number is just so insane. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be looking at that to say, hey, if this is the kind of response that you're going to get from a James Bond film, what about a No Time to Die Spider-Man film? Will that be able to replicate that overseas market in addition to expecting to make the most of any domestic release this year? And for that, we, of course, will have to make... We'll have to, of course, wait and see. But what are your thoughts? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below this video. Smash that like button, smash the rumble button, and light up that fire button on Odyssey. You're all amazing people. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my November Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals members. Starting first off with Patreon, Andrew Hoyle, animation commentator, Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dolores Ed, Dion, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob the Juice, JC, Jeffrey Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyle 79, Laura the Modern Major General Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Ullen, Stan Andrian, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B, the Empress of the Universe. And a shout out to my Subscribestar members, UAB, Mad Dog, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stand 4, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J, Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, and J Rod, the Beer Guru, and of course, ZK Man. Thank you very much for supporting me over there. And to my 3 supporters over on locals.com, Kara Tharp, Bifford a Hobbit, and Robert Barnes. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video I do on the channel, check out that top link in the description below to find out how to sign up to the various levels that exist, including the most basic level where you get a shout out, the secondary level, the Army of Asgard, where you get that, plus access to a giveaways exclusive server where I give away things like 4Ks and Blu-rays and digital codes. All kinds of stuff, a lot of fun. You then also have the Keeper of the Bifrost level where you get all that stuff, plus access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. You get to ask us questions, and you get also access to that and the entire library of podcast episodes that we have done. And then there is, of course, the Chosen of Valhalla level, where not only do you get all of that, but also in your first month, you get a t-shirt of your choice and sent to you anywhere in the world. Of course, just let me know your size and the color option that you want. It'll be sent to you that first month. And also, you get to be featured on the once a month Chosen of Valhalla live stream, where we have a ton of fun talking about movies and projects and all kinds of stuff. Pretty much anything that the Chosen wants to talk about is on the table. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check out that top link. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.